The Duke won his enemy's fortune, unaware his daughter came with it. The card fell face up on green baize, the final play in a game that had stretched past midnight into the small hours where judgment faded and pride sharpened. Gideon Fairfax, Duke of Hartwell, watched Lord Crispin Vale, Viscount Alderley, go pale as winter as the last of his chips disappeared across the table. "One more hand," Alderley said, his voice rough with wine and desperation. "Final wager." He slid a sealed envelope across the table with hands that trembled slightly. Gideon assumed it was another deed, another bond, another piece of property his rival was hemorrhaging in this smoky London club where gentlemen played at ruin. He won the hand. He broke the seal after the others departed. And he froze, reading words that turned victory into something that tasted like ash. A signed agreement binding Alderley's remaining fortune to the proper settlement of his daughter, Rosamond Vale, to the winner of the game. Gideon hadn't just won money. He'd won a woman's future, and he'd never agreed to that wager at all. Hello, lovely. If you're enjoying this tale of honor, impossible choices, and discovering that some victories feel like defeats, I'd be so grateful for a like or subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories of moral complexity, hard-won partnerships, and love that's earned rather than claimed. And if you're up for it, tell me in the comments, what would you do if you won something you never wanted to claim? I read every note and it always brings a smile to my face. 1. The Marlborough Club at 3 in the morning was all smoke and gilt, candlelight catching on crystal glasses and the polished smiles of men who didn't need money, but hungered for victory anyway. Gideon Fairfax had been playing cards with Lord Crispin Vale for 5 hours, a ritual they'd maintained for a decade, ever since Alderley had publicly questioned Gideon's competence in Parliament, and Gideon had responded by systematically dismantling every political argument the man made for the next 6 months. They weren't friends. They were rivals bound by mutual respect that occasionally tipped into genuine dislike, the kind of relationship that thrived in London's gentlemen's clubs where competition was currency and pride was everything. Tonight's game had started ordinarily enough. A few £100 here, some investment papers there, the usual stakes between men of their position. But as midnight passed and Alderley kept losing, the stakes had escalated. Land deeds, horses, railway shares. Each bet larger than the last, each loss making Alderley's face more flushed, his movements more desperate. "One more hand," Alderley said now, his voice carrying the rough edge of too much wine and not enough winning. "Final wager." Gideon should have refused. Should have recognized desperation when it sat across from him wearing expensive tailoring. But pride made him nod, and curiosity made him watch as Alderley pulled a sealed envelope from his jacket and slid it across the green baize. "What is it?" Gideon asked. "Deed to my remaining London property. Worth more than everything I've lost tonight combined." The seal looked official. The envelope was heavy paper, the kind used for legal documents. Gideon studied Alderley's face, seeing genuine desperation there, and something else he couldn't quite name. "If this is worth so much, why wager it?" "Because I believe in this hand." Alderley's smile was tight, brittle. "And because you and I have never walked away from a challenge." That much was true. 10 years of rivalry had taught them both that neither man backed down, even when backing down would be wiser. Gideon dealt. They played. The hand developed with agonizing slowness, each card reveal shifting odds marginally. Other club members had long since departed, leaving just Gideon and Alderley at the table, watched only by a bored attendant near the door. The final card fell face up. Gideon's hand was stronger. Not dramatically so, but enough. He'd won. Alderley stared at his cards for a long moment, then stood with unsteady dignity. "The envelope is yours, Hartwell. I trust you'll handle its contents with appropriate discretion." Something in his voice made Gideon's instincts prickle with warning. Alderley, what exactly is in this envelope? Read it. You won it fairly. Alderley gathered his remaining belongings and left without looking back, moving with the careful control of a man who'd lost more than he could afford and knew it. After he was gone, Gideon sat alone at the table with the sealed envelope. The club was closing, attendants beginning to extinguish candles. He should go home, sleep, read this in the morning with clear mind and steady judgment. Instead, he broke the seal and read by candlelight. The document was indeed legal. But it wasn't a property deed. It was an agreement, signed by Lord Alderley, witnessed by 2 club members, stating that the bearer of this document had claimed to appropriate settlement regarding the future of Miss Rosamond Vale, daughter of Lord Alderley, contingent upon resolution of debts owed. Gideon read it twice, then 3 times, his stomach turning colder with each pass. The language was deliberately vague, but the implication was crystal clear. Alderley had wagered his daughter's future. Not explicitly, that would be too obviously criminal, but through carefully worded legal language that suggested any gentleman holding this document had leverage over Rosamond Vale's marriage prospects, her settlement, her life. It was an old-fashioned, gentleman's bargain, the kind thing that happened in previous centuries when women were property, and fathers could trade them like livestock. It shouldn't exist in 1895. It shouldn't be legal. But the signatures were real, the witnesses were prominent club members, and Alderley had deliberately placed this into play. Gideon felt fury rise hot and immediate. He hadn't agreed to this. Hadn't wanted this. Had come to play cards, not claim a woman he'd never even met. But holding this document, knowing it existed, changed everything. Because now he had to decide what to do with power he'd never asked for over a life he had no right to control. The club attendant coughed politely. Your Grace. We're closing. Gideon stood, folding the document carefully, his mind already racing through options. He needed to void this immediately. Needed to return it to Alderley with clear statement that he wanted no part of whatever scheme this represented. But first, he needed to understand what he'd actually won. And more importantly, he needed to meet the woman whose future had just been used as a gambling chip. Dawn was breaking over London by the time Gideon reached his Mayfair townhouse. His secretary, Mr. Phipps, was already awake, brewing tea in the study with the dedication of a man who'd served the Duke for 15 years and knew his employer's habits too well. Your Grace. Phipps took one look at Gideon's face and poured a stronger cup. Difficult night at the club. You have no idea. Gideon pulled out the document and spread it on his desk. Read this. Tell me I'm not understanding it correctly. If you're enjoying this story, I'd be so grateful for a like and subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories you'd love. Phipps adjusted his spectacles and read carefully, his expression growing progressively more horrified. Your Grace, this appears to be some form of marriage settlement agreement. Except there's no marriage agreement. Just leverage over Lord Alderley's daughter through his debts. That's what I thought. Gideon sat heavily. Alderley wagered it as final bet. He lost. Now I'm holding a document that makes me look like I've claimed a woman as property. Did you know what you were wagering for? I thought it was a property deed. Then you need to void this immediately, publicly, before word spreads. Phipps was already reaching for paper and ink. I'll draft a statement. No. Gideon stopped him. If I void it publicly, Alderley will simply gamble again. Tomorrow. Next week. He'll use his daughter as leverage, because clearly he's desperate enough to do anything. The document goes away, but the vulnerability remains. Then what do you propose? I'm going to Alderley's townhouse at dawn. I'm going to meet Miss Rosamond Vale. And I'm going to figure out how to protect her from her father without becoming the villain of this story myself. Phipps looked doubtful. Your Grace, society will crucify you the moment this becomes public. A duke holding marriage leverage over a viscount's daughter. The scandal alone will be nothing compared to what happens if I do nothing and she gets trapped in something worse. Gideon stood, exhaustion giving way to grim determination. Have my carriage ready in 1 hour. And Phipps. Not a word of this to anyone. The fewer people who know, the less damage we can contain. After Phipps departed, Gideon sat alone with the document that had transformed a card game into a moral crisis. He'd spent 35 years building a reputation for honor, fairness, and steady judgment. He'd won at life through discipline and careful choices, earning respect through competence rather than birth alone. But somewhere along the way, winning had stopped feeling like victory. It felt like performance, going through expected motions without feeling truly alive. Now he held power over a woman's future he'd never asked for, granted through a wager he'd never understood. And somehow, he had to find a way to make this right, without destroying everyone involved in the process. At dawn, Gideon Fairfax, Duke of Hartwell, arrived at Lord Alderley's townhouse in Belgravia to void an agreement he'd never wanted to make. What he found instead was the woman who'd become the wager, and she was already 3 steps ahead of him. If you're enjoying this story, I'd be so grateful for a like and subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories you'd love. 2. The Alderley townhouse showed signs of genteel decay that old money developed when the money stopped being reliable. Elegant, but slightly shabby. Well-maintained facade hiding desperation underneath. Gideon noted these details as the butler, looking harried, showed him into a morning room where breakfast sat cold on the sideboard. His lordship is not receiving visitors this morning, the butler began. I'm not here for his lordship. I'm here for Miss Vale. The butler's expression flickered with something between relief and concern. Miss Vale is in the study, Your Grace. She asked that you be shown directly in if you called. She said you would call. That stopped Gideon cold. She knew I was coming. Apparently, Your Grace. This way. The study was small, lined with books that looked read rather than decorative, cluttered with papers and account ledgers. And behind the desk, reviewing documents with fierce concentration, sat a young woman who looked up as Gideon entered. Rosamond Vale was 24, with dark hair pinned severely back, sharp eyes that missed nothing, and the kind of face that suggested she smiled rarely but meant it when she did. She wore a simple morning dress, no jewelry, and held herself with the rigid dignity of someone who'd learned early that the world would take everything if you showed weakness. Your Grace. She didn't stand, didn't curtsy, just gestured to a chair across from her desk as though he were the visitor, and she were the one granting audience. You'll hear about last night's game. Specifically, about the sealed envelope my father wagered as his final bet. Gideon remained standing, taken aback by her directness. You know about that. Society is fast, Your Grace. Servants are faster. I had the full story by 5 this morning, including the fact that you won a document giving you leverage over my future. Her voice was controlled, but fury burned beneath the surface. Men playing cards, while my life sits in a sealed envelope. How very civilized. Miss Vale, I didn't know what I was wagering for. If I had. You would have what? Refused. Let my father find some other way to trap me. Rosamond's laugh was bitter. Your Grace, I'm not angry at you. I'm furious at him. At a system that lets fathers trade daughters like livestock. At every gentleman who sits at that club and pretends these things don't happen. Gideon pulled the document from his jacket and placed it on the desk between them. I came here to void this. To tear it up and pretend it never existed. Don't. Rosamond's hand shot out, stopping him from touching the paper. If you destroy that quietly, my father will gamble again tomorrow. Next week. He'll use me as leverage, because it's the only asset he has left. The document disappears, but the vulnerability remains. Then what do you suggest? Rosamond met his eyes with startling intensity. You hold the papers. Keep them as protection against further gambling. Meanwhile, I help you understand how my father got here, who his friends are, how his debts actually stack. Because I know all of it, Your Grace. I've been managing his accounts for 3 years, while he gambles and smiles and pretends everything is fine. You want to help me expose your own father. I want to stop him before he destroys himself completely. And before he destroys the tenants and staff who depend on the Alderley estates. Rosamond's voice softened slightly. My father is charming, reckless, drowning in debts and ego. But the people who work our lands shouldn't suffer for his pride. So yes, I'll help you. With conditions. Name them. You hold the papers but you swear, on your honor as Duke of Hartwell, that you will not claim me. Not in marriage. Not in any agreement. This is protection only, not ownership. The words came out fierce, demanding, leaving no room for misunderstanding. Gideon found himself respecting this woman who negotiated her own fate rather than collapsing into victimhood. I swear it, he said clearly. On my honor, I will not claim you in any way. These papers are protection, not ownership. You have my word. Say it again. Like a vow. I, Gideon Fairfax, Duke of Hartwell, swear on my honor that I will not claim Rosamond Vale through leverage, coercion, or any use of the document obtained through last night's wager. She remains free in all respects. This I vow. Something in Rosamond's posture softened marginally. Thank you. They worked through the morning, Rosamond showing Gideon account books that painted a grim picture. Lord Alderley's debts were catastrophic. Not just gambling losses, but failed investments, expensive lifestyle maintenance, lending to friends who never repaid. The Alderley fortune had been bleeding for years while Crispin Vale smiled and charmed and pretended everything was under control. He keeps saying we'll recover, Rosamond explained, her finger tracing a column of mounting interest payments. One good investment. One lucky break. But luck doesn't exist, Your Grace. Only choices and consequences. You're remarkably competent at estate management. If you're enjoying this story, I'd be so grateful for a like and subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories you'd love. Someone had to be. Rosamond closed the ledger with controlled force. My father taught me numbers so I could be useful. He didn't expect me to actually understand what the numbers meant. A knock at the door interrupted them. Mr. Phipps entered, took one look at Gideon and Rosamond working over account books together, and nearly choked on his own breath. Your Grace, I apologize for interrupting, but there's a matter that requires. Phipps stopped, staring at Rosamond. Miss Vale. Mr. Phipps. Rosamond nodded with dry amusement. Yes, I'm the woman from the wager. No, His Grace isn't holding me prisoner. Yes, this is exactly as scandalous as you're imagining. Tea would be lovely, thank you. Phipps looked at Gideon with an expression that clearly said, Your Grace, what have you done? We're investigating Lord Alderley's finances, Gideon explained. Miss Vale is helping me understand how deep the damage goes. So you're working together? Partnership built on mutual necessity, Rosamond corrected. His Grace holds leverage over my future. I hold information about my father's debts. We're collaborating to prevent further damage. This is highly irregular. This entire situation is highly irregular, Mr. Phipps, Gideon's voice was dry. We're simply trying to make irregular slightly less catastrophic. After Phipps departed with visible bewilderment, Rosamond returned to the account books. But her next words came quieter, more vulnerable. Your Grace, I need to ask you something. What? If you discover my father's debts are truly unrecoverable, if the Alderley estates must be sold, will you protect the tenants? The families who've worked that land for generations. They don't deserve to suffer for his mistakes. The question revealed her true priorities. Not her own future, but the lives depending on decisions made by men who'd never consulted them. Yes, Gideon said simply. I'll protect them. That's a promise. That evening, as Gideon prepared to leave, Rosamond stopped him at the door. Your Grace, one more thing. My father disappeared after your card game. He does this sometimes when losses are bad. He'll return, eventually, but when he does. What? He'll have made new deals. Borrowed from new people. Promised things he can't deliver. It's his pattern. Rosamond's face was carefully composed, but her hands betrayed her, twisting together with suppressed anxiety. And his creditors won't care about honor or titles. They'll care about collecting, no matter who gets hurt. As if summoned by her words, the sound of carriages arrived outside. Raised voices. Heavy footsteps. Lord Alderley had returned, and he wasn't alone. Through the window, Gideon saw 3 men emerging from expensive carriages, with faces that promised trouble. Creditors. The kind who'd moved past polite requests and into threats. Rosamond's face went pale. It's worse than I thought. Then we handle it together, Gideon said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. You're not facing this alone. Why would you help me beyond voiding that document? Because it's right. And because you deserve better than being collateral damage in your father's collapse. Gideon moved toward the door. Stay here. Let me see what we're dealing with. No. Rosamond followed him with determination. He's my father. His mess is my responsibility too. We face this together, Your Grace. Partnership, remember? They went to meet the creditors and Lord Alderley together, neither knowing that this was only the beginning of how complicated everything would become. 3. The 3 men waiting in the Alderley drawing room represented different levels of threat. One was well-dressed, polite, clearly from an established lending firm. One was middle-tier, nervous but determined. The third wore expensive clothes badly, and had eyes that suggested he'd moved beyond legal collection methods into something darker. Lord Alderley sat in the center of them, trying to maintain his charming facade while sweat beaded his forehead. He looked up as Gideon and Rosamond entered, his expression flickering between relief and shame. Hartwell. Alderley attempted a smile. Kind of you to call. Though this is perhaps not the best time. It's exactly the time, Alderley. Gideon positioned himself where he could see all 3 creditors clearly. Gentlemen, I'm the Duke of Hartwell. Perhaps you could explain what brings you here. The well-dressed creditor stood, offering a respectful bow. Your Grace. I'm Mr. Pemberton, representing Whitehall Lending. Lord Alderley owes us £12,000, payment overdue by 6 months. We're here to arrange settlement. 12,000, Gideon repeated, his voice carefully neutral. He'd expected debts, but this was staggering. And the others? 7,000, said the nervous middle-tier creditor. Plus interest. The third man smiled without warmth. 30,000. Due immediately. With consequences for non-payment. Rosamond made a sound of dismay. Father, you didn't. Not Carrick. Who's Carrick? Gideon asked quietly. Thomas Carrick, Rosamond's voice was tight with controlled fear. Lender of last resort. The man you go to when reputable sources refuse you. He doesn't care about repayment schedules or negotiation. He cares about collecting, and he doesn't ask nicely. Carrick's smile widened. The lady knows her finances. Smart girl. Perhaps she should explain to her father what happens when debts aren't honored. Mr. Carrick, Gideon interrupted, his voice dropping to the tone he used in Parliament when ending debates. Threats are unnecessary. Let's discuss terms like civilized people. Civilized people pay their debts, Your Grace. Lord Alderley has been neither civilized nor paying. Carrick pulled papers from his jacket. So here are my terms. £50,000, total debt including interest, paid within 30 days. Or I take possession of the Alderley estate in Lancashire. All of it. Land, buildings, tenancies. Everything. That estate supports 60 families, Rosamond said, her voice shaking now. You'd put them on the street. I'd sell to the highest bidder, who might keep them or might not. Not my concern, Miss Vale. Carrick's expression was flat, businesslike. Your father signed the contract. I'm collecting. Lord Alderley looked smaller now, the charming facade completely crumbled. I thought the investment would pay off. Lord Ashford promised. Lord Ashford lies, Gideon said flatly. His promised half of London returns on fabricated ventures. You should have known better. I was desperate. Alderley's voice broke slightly. The debts were mounting. I needed one win to fix everything. So you borrowed from Carrick, invested in fraud, and lost it all. Rosamond's fury was cold, devastating. And now 60 families lose their homes, because you needed one more gamble. The other creditors looked uncomfortable now, watching a family dissolve in front of them. Even Carrick seemed slightly unsettled by Rosamond's controlled rage. Gideon made a decision, one he'd probably regret, but couldn't avoid. Mr. Carrick, I'll buy Lord Alderley's debt. £30,000, paid immediately in exchange for the contract and all claim on the Lancashire estate. The room went silent. Your Grace, Phipps's voice came from the doorway, where he'd apparently been listening. That's an enormous sum. I'm aware, Phipps. Carrick studied Gideon with calculating interest. Why would the Duke of Hartwell buy a failing Viscount's debt? Because I can afford it, and because leaving 60 families at the mercy of whatever buyer you'd find doesn't sit well with me. Gideon met Carrick's eyes without flinching. Do we have an agreement? After a pause, Carrick nodded. Cash payment by Friday. Contract transfers to you. The rest of these gentlemen can arrange their own negotiations. Mr. Pemberton and the nervous creditor quickly agreed to payment schedules, clearly relieved to be dealing with a duke rather than an insolvent viscount. After they left, Lord Alderley sat alone in his chair, looking aged and broken. Hartwell, I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me. Gideon's voice was ice. I didn't do this for you. I did it for your tenants and your daughter. You've spent years making choices that benefit only yourself. Those choices end now. I never meant to hurt Rosamond. You used her as a gambling chip. Rosamond's voice cut through her father's excuses. Last night's wager, father. You bet my future, because you had nothing else left. Don't tell me you never meant to hurt me when you treated me like property. Alderley's face crumpled. I thought Hartwell would be good to you. Better than some of the others who've shown interest. I thought. You thought about yourself. Rosamond stood, her dignity absolute despite visible tears. You always do. She left the room before her composure could break completely. Gideon followed, finding her in the hallway, her back against the wall, breathing hard. I'm sorry you had to see that, she said without looking at him. I'm sorry you've been carrying this alone. I haven't been alone. I've had the account books for company. The attempted humor fell flat. Your Grace, you didn't have to buy that debt. The amount is manageable for me and catastrophic for your tenants. Gideon moved closer, but maintained respectful distance. Rosamond, I need to ask you something honestly. How bad is the total damage? She met his eyes. Beyond the debts we just addressed. There are at least £15,000 more scattered across various creditors. The townhouse is mortgaged. The remaining investments are worthless. If everything were called today, the orderly fortune would be finished. Can it be saved? With time, management, and honesty. Perhaps. But my father would need to stop gambling, stop making promises he can't keep, stop choosing pride over reality. Rosamond's laugh was bitter. So no. It can't be saved. Not as it is. They worked together for the next 3 days, Rosamond showing Gideon the full extent of her father's financial collapse, while they tried to salvage what could be saved. It created intimacy through shared problem-solving, long hours in the study reviewing accounts, mapping debts, identifying which creditors could be negotiated with and which couldn't. Gideon discovered Rosamond was brilliant with numbers, practical where her father was reckless, capable where he was charming. She roasted him gently when he tried to help with ledgers and proved spectacularly incompetent. Your Grace, you've somehow added a column of expenses to a column of dates. That's impressive wrongness. I'm better with policy than numbers. Clearly. Though it's endearing that you're trying. Rosamond's smile, when it appeared, transformed her face from severe to warm. But they weren't working in isolation. London society had noticed the Duke of Hartwell spending considerable time at the orderly townhouse. Gossip spread with vicious efficiency. Some said Gideon was taking advantage of Aldelia's collapse. Others whispered about the mysterious wager. Everyone had opinions, none of them flattering. And into this mess walked Lord Benedict Ashworth. Ashworth was 40, wealthy, polished, and predatory in the way certain men were when they saw vulnerability as opportunity. He arrived at the orderly townhouse one afternoon with flowers and false concern. Miss Vale, I heard about your father's difficulties. I wanted to offer assistance. Rosamond's face went carefully neutral. That's kind of you, Lord Ashworth. If you're enjoying this story, I'd be so grateful for a like and subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories you'd love. I'm prepared to settle all of Lord Aldelia's remaining debts immediately. £15,000. Everything cleared. It sounded generous. Gideon, listening from the hallway, heard the trap underneath. That's very generous, Rosamond said carefully. But what would you expect in return? Ashworth's smile showed too many teeth. Your hand in marriage, of course. With your father's debts cleared and my support, you'd be secure. Respected. Protected. Protected or owned. I don't see the difference, my dear. A woman needs a man's guidance. I'm offering mine. Gideon had heard enough. He entered the drawing room with deliberate presence. Lord Ashworth. I didn't realize you were calling. Ashworth's expression soured seeing Gideon. Hartwell. I'm offering Miss Vale assistance her father clearly can't provide. By offering rescue that looks remarkably like ownership. Gideon's voice was pleasant, dangerous underneath. How charitable. After Ashworth left, his offer standing but no answer given, Rosamond sat in silence, staring at nothing. He's not the first to offer rescue, she said quietly. 3 men since the debts became public knowledge. They all see opportunity, not partnership. A desperate woman is cheap to acquire, apparently. You're not desperate, and you're not for sale. Tell that to my father, who's seriously considering Ashworth's offer. Rosamond looked up at Gideon. Society sees two options for me, Your Grace. Marry for rescue, or face ruin alongside my father. There's no third option where I maintain dignity and independence. Then we create one, Gideon said with sudden conviction. Together. That evening, Gideon learned something that changed everything. Mr. Phipps arrived at the Alderley townhouse with documents and a grim expression. Your Grace, I've been investigating as you asked. The final bet at the club wasn't desperation. It was designed. What do you mean? Phipps spread papers across the desk. Lord Alderley's gambling losses over the past 6 months were orchestrated. His friends at the club encouraged specific bets, recommended investments that failed, loaned him money at rates designed to create crisis. They wanted him desperate enough to make that final wager with you. Gideon felt ice spread through his chest. Why target me? Because having the Duke of Hartwell caught in a scandal involving a woman as wager would damage your political influence. The same influence you've been using to block certain business interests in Parliament. Phipps pointed to names on the documents. 3 of the club members who witnessed that final bet stand to profit enormously from legislation you've been opposing. So they manufactured this entire crisis. And framed you as either villain or savior, neither position particularly comfortable. Phipps looked apologetic. Your Grace, this scandal isn't accidental. It's weaponized. Rosamond had been listening from the doorway. Now she spoke with cold fury. My father wasn't just gambling his fortune away. He was being manipulated into it. By his friends. And we're all caught in the aftermath, Gideon finished. Which means we need to expose this before it destroys everyone involved. 4. The investigation took form slowly, carefully, built on evidence rather than emotion. Gideon and Rosamond worked with Mr. Phipps to document everything, club betting records that showed patterns of encouraged losses, investment recommendations from Alderley's friends that were guaranteed to fail, loans made with predatory terms designed to create crisis. Lady Honoria Strathmore provided unexpected help. The elderly dowager was a force of nature at 72, sharp-tongued and observant, who'd survived 6 decades of London society by being smarter than the men trying to control it. She arrived at the Alderley townhouse one afternoon with her usual lack of ceremony. I heard interesting rumors about the Duke of Hartwell spending considerable time here. Thought I'd investigate personally. Rosamond had heard stories about Lady Honoria. My lady, I assure you nothing improper. Oh hush, child. I don't care about propriety. I care about truth. Honoria settled herself with tea and piercing observation. Your father gambled your future. Hartwell won it. Now you're working together to salvage the mess. Have I missed anything? That's remarkably accurate, Gideon admitted. I'm remarkably good at seeing what others miss. Honoria studied Rosamond with interest. You're holding up well, considering. I'm furious, terrified, and exhausted. But I'm still standing. Good. Never let them see you break. The moment they think you're weak, they'll devour you. Honoria turned to Gideon. You're investigating the club, yes. The betting patterns. How did you? Because I'm not stupid, Hartwell. And because my late husband sat on the Marlborough Club's governing board for 30 years. I know every trick, every scheme, every way men manipulate each other while calling it gentlemanly sport. Honoria pulled papers from her reticule. My solicitor owes me several favors. He can access club records your official channels can't touch. What do you need? Over the next week, they assembled proof. Documented patterns of manipulation. Witness statements from servants who'd overheard conversations. Financial records, showing how Aldelia's friends profited from his collapse. This is conspiracy, Rosamond said, reading through the evidence. Deliberate, calculated, cruel. And completely legal, Gideon added grimly. They encouraged gambling, not forced it. Recommended investments, not guaranteed them. Every action has plausible deniability. Then we expose them publicly, Rosamond said. Make the truth so obvious that legal technicalities don't matter. The perfect opportunity came with the Riverside Charity Evening, a high society event where London's elite gathered to pretend they cared about the poor while actually networking and gossiping. Everyone would be there, including the men who'd manipulated Lord Alderley into collapse. Lady Honoria secured invitations for both Gideon and Rosamond. You'll arrive together. Let society speculate. Then you'll make your move when everyone's watching. The evening arrived with all the glittering excess London society specialized in. Crystal chandeliers, expensive gowns, champagne flowing freely while attendees discussed charity, as though poverty were an interesting problem rather than daily reality for thousands. Gideon arrived with Rosamond on his arm, and the room noticed. Conversations faltered. Fans snapped open. Eyes tracked their progress through the crowd with fascinated speculation. Lord Ashworth appeared almost immediately, his false concern polished to perfection. Miss Vale, I'm surprised to see you here after recent difficulties. Recent manipulations, you mean, Rosamond corrected quietly. There's a difference. Before Ashworth could respond, Gideon guided Rosamond toward the center of the ballroom where the charity auction was about to begin. But instead of allowing the auction to proceed, he caught the attention of the evening's host, Lord Pemberton, the same creditor who'd been reasonable during negotiations. My lord, might I have a moment to address the assembly? It concerns the very charitable spirit we're celebrating tonight. Pemberton looked surprised but nodded. A duke's request at a charity event couldn't be easily refused. Gideon stepped onto the small raised platform where items for auction had been displayed. The crowd quieted, curiosity replacing conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, Gideon began, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom, we gather tonight to discuss charity, generosity, and moral obligation. I'd like to speak about those concepts in practical terms, using a recent situation many of you have whispered about. Fans stopped moving. Every eye fixed on Gideon. If you're enjoying this story, I'd be so grateful for a like and subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories you'd love. 2 weeks ago, I played cards at the Marlborough Club with Lord Alderley. The final wager of that evening included a document that gave me leverage over his daughter's future. Many of you have speculated about this. Some call me villain for accepting such a wager. Others call me savior for not immediately exploiting it. Both labels are wrong, because both assume the wager was legitimate. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Lord Alderley, present at his wife's insistence, went pale. Gideon continued, his voice steady and certain. What I've learned since is that Lord Alderley's financial collapse was not accident or weakness. It was orchestrated by men who called themselves friends, while systematically manipulating him into desperate circumstances. They encouraged specific bets designed to lose. They recommended investments guaranteed to fail. They provided loans with predatory terms. All to manufacture crisis. He pulled documents from his jacket, the evidence they'd assembled. I have records. Betting patterns. Witness statements. Financial documentation. Everything proving that at least 3 members of the Marlborough Club deliberately engineered Lord Alderley's collapse to force me into a scandal that would damage my political influence. The room erupted. Denials. Shocked exclamations. Demands for proof. Gideon simply held up the papers, letting their existence speak louder than any defense. I'm not asking for legal action. These men were careful to stay within technical legality. But I'm asking this assembly to recognize something fundamental: no woman should be a wager. Ever. Under any circumstances. The fact that such a document could be created, witnessed, and accepted as legitimate tells us everything about how society views women as property rather than people. He turned to look directly at Rosamond, who stood watching with tears streaming down her face. Miss Rosamond Vale is brilliant, capable, and deserving of partnership, not rescue. She's been managing her father's estate for years while he gambled. She knows more about finance than most men in this room. Yet society tells her she has two choices: marry for rescue, or face ruin. That's not choice. That's coercion. Gideon stepped down from the platform and crossed to Rosamond. So I'm making something clear publicly. I hold no claim over Miss Vale. The documents from that final wager will be returned to Lord Alderley with clear statement that they have no legal or moral force. Miss Vale is free. Completely. To make her own choices without pressure from me, her father, or anyone else. The silence that followed was profound. This wasn't how dukes behaved. This wasn't how scandals resolved. This was something new, uncomfortable, forcing society to examine assumptions they'd taken for granted. Then Lady Honoria began to applaud. Slowly. Deliberately. Others joined, tentatively at first, then building. Not everyone. Lord Ashworth and several others stood rigid with fury. But enough people applauded that the message was clear. Public opinion could be shifted by public honesty. After the charity evening, Gideon and Rosamond escaped to the terrace, needing air and space away from watching eyes. You didn't have to do that, Rosamond said quietly. Destroy your reputation to protect mine. I didn't destroy my reputation. I traded false respectability for actual integrity. Gideon turned to face her. And I did it because it was right. Because you deserve better than being trapped between rescue and ruin. What happens now? Now we deal with the aftermath. Your father will face consequences from the club. The men who manipulated him will face social judgment, if not legal action. Your remaining debts will be restructured over time with my help. And you'll be free to decide your own future. Free, Rosamond repeated, tasting the word. I'm not sure I remember what that feels like. They stood in comfortable silence, watching London's lights spread below them. Finally, Rosamond spoke again, her voice vulnerable in ways she'd never allowed before. Your Grace, Gideon, I need to tell you something. These past weeks, working beside you, watching you choose honor over convenience every single time, I've discovered something I didn't expect. What? That I've fallen in love with you. Not because you rescued me. Because you didn't. Because you treated me as partner, not property. Because you asked my opinion and actually listened. Because you made me laugh while reviewing terrible account books. She took a breath. I'm telling you this with no expectation. You've given me freedom. I won't trap you with obligation disguised as affection. Gideon felt something unlock in his chest, warmth flooding through spaces that had been cold for years. Rosamond, I've spent 35 years winning at life without feeling alive. I built reputation, earned respect, followed every rule, and felt empty underneath. Then I met you, and for the first time, everything felt real. The arguments. The laughter. The partnership. You made me remember why any of it matters. He took her hands, his voice steady with certainty. I love you. Not as rescue, not as obligation, but as choice. As partnership. As the woman who challenged me, worked beside me, and showed me what honest connection feels like. Then what do? We take time. Let scandal settle. Let your father's situation resolve. Let you experience freedom without immediately trading it for marriage. Gideon smiled slightly. And then, when enough time has passed, that choice is real rather than coerced, I'm going to ask you properly. To marry me. To build a life together. But only if you truly want it. I want it now. So do I. But we do this right. No more gambling with futures. No more coercion disguised as devotion. Just honest partnership, chosen freely by two people who value each other. Rosamond nodded, understanding. 3 months. Let everything settle. Then ask me again. 3 months, Gideon agreed. They sealed it with a kiss that felt like promise and partnership in equal measure. 5. 3 months passed with deliberate pace. The Marlborough Club's governing board investigated Gideon's claims and found enough evidence to quietly remove 3 members, their reputations damaged beyond repair. Lord Alderley faced formal censure, but was allowed to retain membership after promising to abstain from high-stakes gambling permanently. The remaining Alderley debts were restructured with Gideon's financial backing, payment schedules arranged that protected tenants and staff while slowly recovering what could be saved. The Lancashire estate remained intact. 60 families kept their homes. Rosamond moved to Lady Honoria's townhouse, accepting the Dowager's offer of respectable independence while her father's household reorganized. She helped Gideon with estate management, her practical skills complementing his political knowledge, partnership building through shared work. Lord Alderley broke in pieces, then slowly reformed. Not perfectly. Not dramatically. But he attended meetings with his creditors sober. He stopped making promises he couldn't keep. He apologized to Rosamond with stammering inadequacy that somehow felt more genuine than polished speeches would have. I'm sorry, he said one afternoon, sitting in his study surrounded by account books Rosamond had organized. For treating you as solution rather than daughter. For gambling your future because I couldn't face my present. You deserved better than me. I still deserve better, Rosamond replied quietly. But I'm willing to let you try to become better. That's all I can offer. That's more than I deserve, Alderley admitted. If you're enjoying this story, I'd be so grateful for a like and subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories you'd love. Lord Ashworth attempted one final play, arriving at Lady Honoria's townhouse to renew his offer of marriage. Miss Vale, my offer stands. Marriage. Security. Respectability. No, Rosamond said simply. I choose freedom over rescue, partnership over ownership. Your offer was never about me. It was about acquisition. I'm not interested. After he left, Lady Honoria offered wisdom born from decades of observation. Men will call it love when it's really appetite. Watch what they do when it costs them. Ashworth wanted ownership. Hartwell gave you freedom. That difference matters. The formal reckoning came at a specially convened meeting at the Marlborough Club. Gideon presented his evidence to the full committee, documentation of manipulation and predatory lending, witness statements from servants and financial officers. The men responsible attempted defense, but their explanations crumbled under scrutiny. They played within legal boundaries, the committee chairman acknowledged. But they violated every principle of gentlemanly conduct. Therefore, they're expelled permanently. Their memberships are revoked. Their reputations will carry this stain indefinitely. It wasn't criminal justice. But it was social consequence, which in their world often mattered more. After the meeting, Mr. Phipps approached Gideon with visible relief. Your Grace, I've spent 3 months panicking about scandal. But somehow you've emerged as the most respectable man in the room by refusing to behave like it. I just chose truth over performance, Phipps. Apparently that's revolutionary in our circles. Revolutionary and effective. Phipps smiled slightly. Though I do hope your next political campaign involves less gambling and more traditional policy discussion. 3 months to the day after their conversation on the terrace, Gideon arrived at Lady Honoria's townhouse with a formal request. Not a surprise. Rosamond had been expecting him. He found her in the morning room, reviewing correspondence, looking exactly as she had that first dawn when she'd challenged him about the wager. Sharp, capable, beautiful in ways that had nothing to do with decoration and everything to do with substance. Rosamond Vale, Gideon began without preamble. 3 months ago I promised to ask you properly. To give you time to experience freedom before asking you to choose partnership. That time has passed. So I'm asking now, with no coercion, no pressure, just honest question. I'm listening. Will you marry me? Not because you need rescue. Not because society expects it. But because we've built something real over months of work and honesty. Because I value your mind, your spine, your warmth when you forget to guard it. Because I want a life built on partnership rather than performance. Terms, Rosamond said, echoing their first negotiation. Name them. Written settlement ensuring my financial independence. Money set aside in my name for charitable work. Voice in all estate decisions, not just decorative presents. And honesty. Always. Even when it's uncomfortable. Agreed without hesitation. Gideon pulled papers from his jacket. I had my solicitor draw these up last week. Settlement guaranteeing everything you've asked for. Your independence is legally protected, not just promised. Rosamond read through the documents carefully, her practiced eye catching every detail. It was genuinely comprehensive. More than generous. Partnership formalized in legal language. You were confident I'd say yes, she observed. I was hopeful. But I wanted you to see I meant it. That this isn't ownership disguised as marriage. This is true partnership. Then yes. Rosamond set down the papers and crossed to him. Yes, I'll marry you, Gideon Fairfax. Not because you won me in a card game. Because we chose each other freely through months of honesty, argument, laughter, and learning what real partnership means. They sealed it with a kiss that felt like coming home. The wedding took place 6 weeks later, small and private, attended only by people who genuinely supported them. Lady Honoria cried openly. Mr. Phipps managed to remain composed until the vows, then discreetly wiped his eyes. Even Lord Alderley attended, sober and humbled, attempting to become the father Rosamond deserved rather than the one she'd endured. Mrs. Ellery, Gideon's housekeeper, watched the ceremony with satisfaction. About time His Grace found someone who challenges him instead of just agreeing with him. She'll keep him honest. After the ceremony, during the small reception at Gideon's townhouse, Rosamond found herself standing beside Lady Honoria, watching guests mingle. You did well, Honoria said quietly. Demanded freedom first. Partnership second. That's the right order. I learnt from the best, Rosamond replied warmly. You've been more than kind these past months. I've been strategic. Strong women need to support each other in a world built to keep us decorative and silent. Honoria squeezed her hand. You're going to change things, girl. Not dramatically. Not overnight. But steadily, by simply refusing to accept limitations others try to impose. That's how real change happens. That evening, after guests departed and the household settled into quiet, Gideon and Rosamond sat in his study reviewing the account books that had become their shared language. Not romantic, perhaps, but deeply them. I've been thinking about the Lancashire estate, Rosamond said, making notes in neat columns. If we restructure the tenant agreements to include profit sharing, they'd have incentive to improve yields. Everyone benefits. That's remarkably progressive thinking. That's fair thinking. People work harder when they share rewards, not just labor under arbitrary rents. Rosamond looked up, smiling. We could make Alderley's estate a model for reform. Show that treating tenants as partners rather than subjects benefits everyone. We, Gideon repeated, warmth spreading through his chest. I like that word. We decide. We plan. We build together. Partnership, Rosamond agreed. The real kind. Built on honesty, mutual respect, and the freedom to challenge each other without fear. They worked together through the evening, comfortable in the silence broken only by scratch of pens and rustle of papers. This was their romance. Not grand gestures or passionate declarations, but steady partnership built on truth. Years later, when people asked about their unusual courtship, Rosamond would smile and say simply, "He won me in a card game, then gave me freedom. I chose him anyway because freedom meant I actually could choose." Gideon would add, "Best hand I ever won. Even though winning almost destroyed us both." Sometimes victory isn't about claiming prizes. It's about recognizing when you've been given something valuable, and choosing to honor it rather than own it. And they'd exchange glances that spoke of years spent proving that partnership chosen freely was worth more than any fortune won through games. If you're enjoying this story, I'd be so grateful for a like and subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories you'd love. And so, dear listeners, Gideon and Rosamond proved that sometimes the bravest act is giving someone freedom even when you have power over them. They showed us that real love isn't about rescue or ownership, but about partnership built on mutual respect. That reputation matters less than integrity. And that the best victories are the ones where everyone wins dignity, not just the person holding the cards. If this story touched your heart, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing for more tales of moral courage, hard-won partnerships, and love that's chosen freely rather than claimed through coercion. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you do if you won something you knew was wrong to claim? How do you define real partnership? Share your reflections in the comments below. Until next time, may you always choose integrity over advantage, partnership over ownership, and may you find someone who values your freedom as much as your presence. This is your storyteller reminding you that the most powerful stories are the ones where people choose what's right over what's easy, even when it costs them everything.